All right, Judges chapters 1 and 2 that we, of course, previously looked at give a couple of introductions to the book, slightly different angles. Chapter 1, you recall, talking about relative success, relative failure among the tribes to go into their territories and to drive out the people. Some were more successful at that than others. And then chapter 2, talking about how Joshua's time was a time of faithfulness, and those who outlived Joshua, the elders of that generation, they were faithful to Joshua. But then this generation arose that didn't know the Lord. They weren't faithful to him. Then it gives that summary of cycles of apostasy and restoration among the children of Israel there in chapter 2. And toward the very end of chapter 2, the Lord addresses his people. In chapter 2, verse 20, says, "Then the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they keep the ways of the Lord to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua." So the beginning of that chapter, remember, the angel addressed the people. At the end of the chapter, the Lord is addressing those people, both on the same subject of you're not faithful, and here are consequences that unfold because of that. Chapter 3, the very beginning of it, carries that over. It's still talking about that relative issue among the people. And we want to read verses 1 through 6 as it notes particular nations, and then a couple of more things about this testing of his people. So let's read Judges 3, 1 through 6. Who will grab that for us? Elijah, go ahead.
Now these are the nations which the Lord left, that he might test and revive them, that is, all who had not known any of the wars of Canaan. This was only so that the generations of the children of Israel might be taught to know war, at least those who had not formerly known, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites who dwelt from Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to the entrance of Canaan. And they were left, that he might test Israel by them, to know whether they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. Thus the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods.
Okay. So again, noting that they're left there to test Israel. And he says something specific in verse 4. What's that testing that he's doing with them?
Whether they would keep the commandments.
Okay.
The commandment is not have false gods.
And how would those nations being there provide that test, whether or not they would keep the commands?
Like they did when they intermarried with the women of those nations. The women, a lot of times the men would be weak and take on the false gods.
Okay, any other thoughts on that?
Well, they need to learn war. So they kept them there so they would learn war. And to Haynes' point, God said drop them out, so it gives them an opportunity to do the right thing, do what God said.
Okay. Ron.
Stephen, there is also, I guess, the inverse of this, and that is by knowing war, they're not knowing peace. If they had followed God's plan and purpose, they would know peace. So, in my thought, it's not that God purposefully leaves them there that they would know war, but that's the consequence for the decision that they made by not doing what you read at the outset of our study this morning, and obeying his command and driving them out.
Yeah. He's left these people there because of choices, decisions, or lack of faith, determination to serve God. And what unfolds is, as they're surrounded by these people, they're going to be tested day in and day out. Do we go the way of this culture around us, or do we commit ourselves to serving the Lord? Are we going to fulfill His commands and drive these people out, or are we not? Are we going to worship idols or not? Are we going to intermarry with them, which God had told them don't do that, or not? What are we going to do here? So it was a challenge to them day after day after day in whether or not they would honor God in their life. And so they're going to have these struggles, and this intermarriage that they became involved in verse 6, it corrupted them as a people. It corrupted the Israelites away from God and serving Him and honoring Him. And it just goes to the point of how important marriage is. God recognized that, and what kind of influence that can have over people. Your mate is going to have a major influence. And we're going through that whole series of studies on Wednesday nights with family life, and we'll talk more about that in those things. But here is one of those places where it says, yeah, it has a serious impact on people, depending on who they marry. And so I want us to think for just a minute, what did Jesus pray, John 17:15, relative to us and the world? You remember? John 17:15. Does anybody want to read that for us? Go ahead, Ron.
I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one.
Okay. We're not going to be taken out of this world. We would like to be, and I have had many thoughts in my mind, just go as far away from civilization as I possibly can and hunker down because it's chaos. But we're not to be taken out of the world. We have to live here. We need to strive to be a positive influence. And so in our daily lives, like the Israelites, we have these choices. The culture around us is putting pressure, and there are things that are alluring to us in the world around us. And in 1 John, remember chapter 2, he says, do not love the world nor the things in the world. All that is in the world, lust the eye, lust the flesh, pride of life, is not of the Father, it's of the world. And those things are passing away. And so we can't love the world around us. The Israelites weren't to love that culture around them, but they became very accommodated to that culture. And we cannot go down that same path, but we need to stand apart. But there's something else in here. When you think about chapter 2, those cycles, when we go through the rest of these and begin to look at the various judges and the cycles that go on, there's the testing, there's the failure of that test, there's the falling away, there's the crying out to God, and then what?
He would come and renew them again and again and again.
Okay. Over and over and over. It's amazing, especially when you read back in the book of Exodus and how God told Moses more than once, I'm done with them, I'm going to wipe them out and raise up a nation from you. Here you see God's great patience and His mercy and His forgiveness extended toward His people as they continually fell into this cycle of rebellion against Him. And the same is true for us in our lives. God is very patient and forgiving toward us. Mike?
You know, and whenever, to your point about Moses, whenever he stepped in, someone make one of just get out of the way, let me destroy them, I'll make one out of you. Moses' argument to that was that you wouldn't want anyone to say that you brought them out here just to kill them. That's not who you are. Joshua says that as well, But what we find is that in this case, God has kept His promise to give them. There's really no one to kind of step in that gap, so to speak, between Israel and God. And so God's patience really shows through in this.
Yes, He's showing great patience in these times, these dark times for the children of Israel. Any other thoughts? Ron?
Stephen, as you pointed out previously, these things tend to prolong until the point that Israel repents. And there's got to be repentance, and then God will restore them. But until the time that they are prepared to turn away from it, they continue in it, the oppression.
Right. They continue to experience that. And so great lessons there as to how God deals with his people. Zach?
Yeah, Mike's mentioned God's patience. It would have been a lot easier for everyone to already be out of the land, for them to not have the trials in the first place. That would have made their lives easier. But making lives easier isn't the same thing as proving yourself to God as being faithful, doing the hard thing. When we prove ourselves to God, our relationship improves with God. So we have to do those hard things. He's asking them to do the hard things. He's not just going to remove every barrier, every trial, every enemy. We have to do what he's asked us to do before things get good.
And that type of thing helps us it ought to drive us to see our need for God daily in our lives as we struggle against these things that are around us, as they were doing in the land as well. All right, let's read verses 7 through 11, Judges 3, 7 through 11. Look at Othniel. Who's got that? Joshua.
The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that he sold them to the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram and Haran, who the Israelites were subject for 8 years. When they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Phinehas, Caleb's younger brother, from Satan. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, so that he became Israel's judge and wins the war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So they reigned at peace for 40 years, and so Othniel, son of Phinehas, died.
All right. So Israel did evil and they're oppressed. What does it say they did relative to the Lord there in verse 7? Gary?
They forgot.
What does it mean by forgot? Did they forget Jehovah exists?
No, they just didn't do the things that were required.
Yeah, they lacked loyalty. They forgot to honor him. They left that out. They pushed that out of their mind. They did not renew their strength, their faith, their commitment, determination to him. They didn't build that up. And so they forgot him. There are people who maybe were raised by Christians that they, let's say in their late teens or maybe their 20s, they fall away. And in their 40s and 50s, if you have a conversation with them, they know God exists and they know some of the things in the Bible, but some of the basic things in the Bible, they don't know. They've forgotten it. It's gone in their mind because they've not had that continual study, renewing of the Spirit and things like that. So these people have forgotten the Lord, their commitment, their devotion, their covenant, their relationship with him. And it says they serve the Baals and the Asherahs. And who are the Baals and Asherahs? Jim?
Idols.
Idols. Anything to expand on that?
The Baals are the male gods, and the Asherahs are the female gods.
Right.
They've got it covered.
Yes, and notice that these are plural. Sometimes we think of Baal, and sometimes it's referred in this way. We think of Baal as a single entity. But there were many Baals, there were many Asherahs. It's just saying that there are male representations of these deities and female representations of them. And each of them have their own particular sphere and worship rites and all those kinds of things, which were very immoral, very much so paganistic in following after them, of course. But it's saying they've accepted all these things around them. They left God out, which was a sin, and then they followed these idols, which was another sin. So double sin here.
Stephen, presently the Buddhists still practice this. In Japan, they have the Temple of 1,000 Buddhists. So they try to cover everything they possibly can.
Right.
And so is the state with these people. They're superstitious thinking.
Yes, very much so. And the Hindu religion is the same. I have heard, I have never verified, and I am never going to verify 1 million or 1 million plus gods, so-called, in their pantheon of things. But yeah, so something interesting here. When it says they serve the Baals and the Asherahs, what ends up happening? What happens as a result of that?
God hands them over to say, let's see if these gods can save you out of money, and where you really ought to be. And I know we'll get to others later, but this cycle will continue to go through this dance of sin and repentance and everything else comes along with it.
Well, they became subservient to that nation because they acquiesced in the things that were required to serve those gods.
Okay, so they think we're just going to serve these other gods and we have these benefits in serving these other gods, but it becomes an enslavement to a foreign power. And that's the thing, you see that again and again, that when they serve the idols, they serve nations. Others dominate over them. When we enter into sin, it's not just that sin, and the devil tries to sell us the idea, well, you've got freedom, you've got benefits here in this sin, but you become a slave. You become subservient to another power, another entity. Really, a slave to Satan when we enter into that. And so you just see that jump out in the political world here as the nation falls away, or as a group of the people, really is what's happening here. There's a segment of the Israelites that have followed this, and so another dominant power overtakes them. Question number 1 on this sheet was, how long did the oppression last under Cushan? I'm just going to use that first part. And who was sent as a deliverer? So, how long oppressed? 8 years. That seems like a really long time, but 8 years. So they're oppressed, and then who's sent as that deliverer? Othniel. Now this Cushan Rishathaim, however you say his name, the Truth for Today commentary says that his name could mean doubly wicked. That he's a very bad guy. And where's he from? What's his home territory? Where is Mesopotamia? Hank?
Modern day Iraq.
Okay.
Specifically that time.
So relative to Canaan, where is it?
Northeast.
Okay, northeast. It's not in Canaan land is the point. So it's very interesting, and I believe this is the only one in the book of Judges, that there is this foreign power outside of Canaan that is exerting power in Canaan. Now, I have a theory. I don't know this for sure, but I have a theory because this is Othniel, and he is the son of Kenaz. He's Caleb's nephew. And remember, this is the one who married Caleb's daughter and received the land. So this is early in the period of Judges. And my theory is because the Israelites had devastated the stronger powers in Canaan land, that this foreign power is able to exert influence and dominance in this region at this time. It's not the first time. Remember back in Genesis chapter 14 that there were kings from over in Mesopotamia who came and subdued the kings of the southern Jordan Valley and all those things that unfolded there. So this wasn't unusual to happen, but it is a case of where the children of Israel are subject to this Mesopotamian king, and having to do his bidding and be under his thumb, so to speak. Any other thoughts there? Nancy?
Well, it was interesting to me because that's the land that God called Abraham out of to begin with, and all these years later, he brings them to the promised land, and that's the power that comes in and controls them because they turn their back on God.
Exactly right. There is some irony in there. You see God's irony in working in that way. Mike?
You know, I was thinking about whenever they started serving the Baals and the Asherah, you know, they thought they had this freedom, but it ended up being enslavement to them. That's kind of what's spoken in 2 Peter. You know, whenever people promise things to you, if you do the sin and everything else, you end up becoming enslaved to the sin. And, you know, promising freedom, but whatever you are addicted to, whatever it is that you're doing, you become the enslavement of it. You become a slave of it.
Exactly right. And so 2 Peter chapter 2 talks about that. Romans chapter 6 talks about you're the slave to the one you obey. You're a servant to that one. And here they're a slave to this Cushan, Mesopotamian king. And Israel then, under this suffering, cries out at the beginning of verse 9 there. And Othniel is sent to redeem them. Now let's think just a little bit more about Othniel. What kind of man is he? When you think about, let's put it this way, compare him to other judges.
He's like still younger.
He's probably pretty old at this time. He's probably an older man at this time because it's been enough time. They've gone into Canaan. He's received his inheritance. There's enough time for them to have fallen away, for this foreign power to exert influence. And now, after that 8 years, he's raised up to deliver them. But, Mike.
I think he's also fought alongside with Joshua and things like that. He's mentioned in the book of Joshua.
Okay, he's mentioned in Joshua. Anything else? Who's his father-in-law? Caleb. There's a connection there. It's helping us to see there is a connection with him and Caleb. What kind of man was Caleb? It's a great man of faith, right? And here's the young man, his nephew, who married his daughter. It's helping us to see this is a man of faith. Compare him to Samson. He doesn't have the behavior of Samson or Jephthah. He doesn't act like Jephthah. He's not like Gideon. This is very early on. He would have been one of the guys that would have remembered the Lord, been faithful. This is early on in that period. He's not corrupted like the rest of the people here. Mike?
I was going to say, maybe later on down the line, the judges are less desirable, so to speak, than what we would say. And, you know, it's what God used, it's what he had to use. So,
Yeah, here's a man who kind of stands out among the judges. He doesn't have a mark against his record. So it's interesting to see that. Question number 2, how long did the land rest after being delivered? And then I asked you to compare to the years of oppression and be ready to discuss that. So how long did it have rest? And it just makes a statement of fact. He was delivered. So Othniel delivered him. How long? 11? So 40 years. So compare that to the years of oppression. Okay, 5 times longer. Any thoughts there?
They also were, this period was as long as he lived after he died.
So, any other observations there?
The generation of the Jews was 40 years when he died, and at my dad's point, the next generation grew up and the cycle repeats again.
Right. And this 40 years very often does refer to a generation. So it's roughly 40 years. It's probably a rounded number. But you've got this period of rest, which means they're not being oppressed, which means They're not in the rebellion like they were in before, but they do cycle back into it. And one of the things that I thought of is God's blessing exceeds that curse, that punishment. He's relieved them of that, and now they have 40 years of rest as they have turned back to God, as the deliverer has come along. And so there's the blessing exceeds what they had to endure, at least in time period, as we're thinking about it. Zach?
Is it too much to try to apply this to eternity in the sense that 40 years has a sense of fullness, a cycle that God has determined to be longer than, well, we've talked about longer than 8 years, but by comparison, the time of blessing and rest could represent the difference between eternal rest, where we're for years and years and years, figuratively speaking, not being oppressed on our short time here on earth. I don't think that's exactly what this is getting to, but if we're comparing some time periods, to me that comes to mind at least.
Yes, it echoes that for sure. There's a foreshadowing, if you will, and God does have a rest that awaits us after a life that is like a vapor. So, very good. All right, so let's jump into Ehud now. Let's read, we need to break this down a little bit more. 12 to 15. Who will read 12 to 15 for us? Micah?
And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. Then he gathered to himself the people of Ammon and the people of Amalek, went and defeated Israel, and took possession of the city of palms. So the children of Israel served Eglon, king of Moab, 18 years. But when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, the son of Garrett, the Benjamite, the left-handed man. By him the children of Israel sent tribute to Eglon, king of Moab.
All right. So, first of all, of course, they do evil again. Eglon, king of Moab. Then he gets Amalek and Ammon in with him in this alliance against the Israelites. So let's just break it down. Who are the people of Moab? Moab is the territory east of the Jordan, kind of southeast. It's south of where the eastern tribes settled.
Descendants of Lot.
Descendants of Lot. Who's Ammon? Descendants of Lot. Remember, his two daughters had incestuous relations with their father, and these are the descendants. This is the result of them. So you can understand why they're allying together, because they're all cousins. Okay. Amalek. Who's Amalek? If you jump all the way back to Exodus chapter 17, the children of Israel came up out of Egypt. The Amalekites are the ones that attacked them in the rear, attacked the weaker part of them. And that's when Joshua comes to the fore. He's the general, and they fight him. And later in 1 Samuel chapter 15 is when the Lord says, wipe them out, Saul. Of course, he failed to do that. But these are those Amalekites. So the Amalekites don't like the Israelites anyway. And you have the Moabites, the Ammonites, cousins, relatives, and they draw in the Amalekites, and they go and attack Israel and bring them under their control. They oppress them. Now, it says there that the Lord, or the Israelites cried out to the Lord in verse 15, and he sent Ehud. Ehud means united or strong, and he's a Benjamite. What does Benjamin literally mean? Does anybody remember? Son of my right hand, but he is what? He's left-handed. Okay, there's just an interesting thing there. Son of my right hand, but here's a left-handed man, which is helping us to see this is unusual. Most people, all through history, have been right-handed, but he's left-handed, and he's a trusted leader already because he's one of the ones that's chosen to send tribute, to carry that tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Let's read now verses 16. Let's go down through 25, 16 to 25. Who will get that? Carter?
And Ehud made for himself a sword of 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence. And all his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came back to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade. And the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly. And the dung came out. Then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. When he had gone, the servants came, and when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he is relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. And they waited till they were embarrassed. But when he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them. And there lay their Lord dead on the floor.
All right. So question 3, I'd ask you to summarize this, how Ehud delivered people from the oppression, what was the key action taken, how long did the land have rest, and we'll get to that last part in just a minute. But says that he made himself, in Carter's translation, says a sword, but other translations say what? A dagger. And it really is more of a dagger-like object that he uses here. It's a double-edged dagger. It's a straight blade or fixed blade. And it's the handle, between the handle and the blade itself, there's not, a big cross. I forget what you call that piece that goes across. But anyways, it's relatively small because of what we read later. We'll talk about that in just a second. So he makes that, and what does he do with it? Verse 16.
First of all, what's a cubit? How long is it?
18 inches, 1.5 feet.
Yeah, he put it on his right side, his left hand.
But not just on his right side. On his thigh. Why is he putting it there?
Concealed.
Okay, concealed.
As you noted previously, he's left-handed, so he puts it on his right thigh so he can easily draw it out.
Right. This is maybe backward in our minds because of our modern weapons, that you generally keep it on your strong side, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, generally speaking. But the way they would carry a sword back then is if you're right-handed, you carry it on your left side because you got to draw it out of the sheath. Whereas, on this side, you don't have as long of the ability to draw. So it would be the opposite. So he's got it on his right thigh up under his clothes, so concealed, right, Mike?
Cross draw, some people prefer cross draw, and just pull also, but.
Yeah.
To your point though, it mentions specifically right hand, and this little detail shows that, this was something that really happened. It's, a detail that most people wouldn't think about, you just kind of assume it, but it's written in there, so this isn't some myth or legend or anything like that.
Yeah, and it helps us also going into Eglon. His guards are probably looking to see if they have weapons, if they're not checking them. And so when he's got it on his right thigh under his clothes, even if they touch both sides of his hips, they're not going to detect a weapon. Even if they just sort of give that pat and say, okay, go on in, That's why he's doing it, because he needs to be able to sneak a weapon in. And he goes in the first time, obviously being checked. He leaves. He comes back, whether he was checked the second time or not, I don't know. But he's able to sneak it in this way. But they go and they pay the tribute to Eglon. So they're showing him respect, obedience, all of that. They leave. They're on their way back. It says, verse 19, they turn around at the idols or the stone images. This could possibly also be a quarry where they quarry things to make images. But however that is, he turns around. This may be kind of the edge of Moab's stronghold, their territory, because it later mentions about going out. But he goes back and he gets in. How does he get back in and get an audience with Eglon?
Message for you.
Right. Did he have a secret message?
I guess it's pretty secret.
A pretty pointed message, right? Had to do it. So he gets in there with him, and all the others are sent out. So Eglon's buying into this. Oh, here's a man, he just brought me a bunch of money. He's come back with a secret message. All right, everybody get out. I want to hear this. Then what does Ehud do? This is one that young men especially are like, I love this story. What does he do?
Hebrews 4:12.
Yes, isn't it interesting? Yeah. He puts the dagger in so deep. Of course, it makes note that he's a very fat man. Not just a fat man, but a very fat man. And that's why 18 inches of blade in the hilt can go all the way in and basically be swallowed up in his body. He didn't pull it out. But it makes note in verse 22 that when this happened and the fat closed over the blade, he didn't draw it back out. It says in the New King James that his entrails came out. What translation do you have, Carter?
ESV.
The ESV says dung came out. So he stuck him in his gut. And there are some who say that he lost control of his bowels at that time, which those situations, people do that. It could be that he had pierced his gut, and it came out. But it explains why his servants later, when they went up to check on him, they thought he was relieving himself. Because there's an odor there. Right? They think, oh, well, that must be what let's give him some time. And then it goes so long, they're embarrassed. Something's not right here. So they go up, they unlock it, they find him there dead. So here's one of the things that I think is very beautiful about the Bible. It tells us about these things without being vulgar, without being gross. It says, look, he's in there, here's what happened. They're embarrassed, they're thinking and the word there for relieving himself or for attending to his needs is literally covering the feet. It's just the idea of the action being taken and the way that they took care of those things. But it gives us detail. It is gross to think about what happened here, but it tells us very plainly, here's what happened, and here's how that man died. He died at the hand of Ehud. So what happens with Ehud after he assassinates him? Let's read verses 26 through 29. 26 to 29. Who's got that? Go ahead, Ron.
But Ehud had escaped while they delayed and passed beyond the stone image and escaped to Sirah. And it happened when he arrived that he blew the trumpet in the mountains of Ephraim, and the children of Israel went down with him from the mountains, and he led them. Then he said to them, follow me, for the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him, sieged the fords of the Jordan leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. And at that time, they killed about 10,000 men of Moab, all stout men of valor. Not a man escaped.
Okay. So Ehud rallies the soldiers, and they're able to win a great victory there. It's interesting where he goes. Where does it tell us that he ends up going? Where does he make the recruitment? Okay. What tribe's he from? Benjamite, but he goes to the mountains of Ephraim there and recruits men. So it's showing there's some cooperation among the tribes here, and he's able to go and to call these men to battle with him, to go out there and defeat the Moabites and that alliance with them. What does it tell us they did when he gets them and they come down from the mountains? What do they do in verse 28? It says a lot of part of verse 28, they do something. Fords. What's a ford in this context?
Isn't there a point of crossing the river where you would ford the river?
Yeah. Yeah, so what they're doing is they're seizing strategic positions to either not allow escape of the Moabites that are on the east side of the river, and or not allow any Moabites to cross over the river to help out their allies, their people. So they go and they seize that. They kill, it says, 10,000 men. There's not a man of them that escaped. They were stout men. It wasn't like these were weak men, but they were stout men that they conquered. And then the land had rest. Verse 30, how long did the land have rest?
8 years.
How long? 80 years. Yeah, pretty good long time. Again, this helps us. When you go through and you add all these things up in the book of Judges, if you do it sequentially, back to back, the time frame doesn't fit, so you understand these overlap. This 80 probably overlapped with the previous 40 in some ways, because these oppressions, these attacks by the enemies, they're in different territories, and you can see that. Some are in the north, some are in the south, and things like that. So anyway, verse 31. Who will read verse 31 for us? Go ahead, Philip.
After him was Shamgar, the son of Ammon, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad. He also delivered Israel.
Okay. What do we know about Shamgar? Yeah, he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Now, Shamgar, Truth for Today commentary says probably a foreigner. His name is a foreign name. He may be a foreigner and not a native Israelite, but he's there with them, living among them. Maybe he's allied with them. Maybe he's assimilated in among them. However that may be, it's amazing, and that's what I was getting at in question 4 on the worksheet, is what is amazing about him is he killed 600 Philistines. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's in one battle. Like in one day, he just took an ox goad and he's facing, 1,000 guys and he kills 600 of them. It's probably over some period of time that he kills all these men. But what is it that's interesting about an ox goad? By the way, what is an ox goad?
It would be something that you would use to prod the oxen, so it could be a long staff, maybe with a point on it, or something of that nature. And we see that even today with cattle or animals that you're prodding them, in this case, using a goad.
Right. It's a longer stick, staff, implement, has a sharp point on the end. The guy behind the ox, whether it's a cart, pulling a cart, pulling a plow or whatnot, he would have to be able to be behind there and then poke that ox with that ox goad. And so it's essentially, we might think of it as a thin spear type thing. Is there anything interesting about the fact that he uses an ox goad? Not a purpose-built weapon, right? Remember later when we get into the time of King Saul, it says that the Philistines didn't allow the Israelites to have weapons, and if they needed something sharpened, they would have to go down to the Philistines to get it sharpened, because they essentially banned their weapons, right? And so this may be that kind of case that's going on, that the enemy who's oppressed them won't allow them to have weapons, won't allow them to make swords and carry swords and things, but they will allow a farm implement. Okay, that's what I've got, that's what I'm going to use. Mike?
And it probably looks innocent enough also to the enemy. He's got an ox goad, so what?
It's got a pointy stick.
Exactly.
Well, a pointy stick can do a lot of damage.
Like a shepherd. Staff.
But it's very pointy and used to poke the ox. All right, so that's all we know about Shamgar. Very interesting, very brief, but there he is. All right, the next one we're going to get into, we're just going to briefly touch on this with a couple minutes we have left, of course, is Deborah and Barak. And so let's read here verses 1 through 9, if somebody could get that for us real quick, 1 through 9. Go ahead, Philip.
When Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Haramsheth, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim. The children of Israel came up to her for judgment.
Okay, let's pause there for just a second. So what's unique about Deborah, about this account in 4 and 5? Anything jump out at you? She's a woman. Only woman judge, right? Anything else?
Prophetess.
She's a prophetess.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well.
Philip?
She's also already judging Israel.
Yeah, she's already judging Israel, and she's a different kind of judge from the other judges. So the use of our terms are kind of overlapping here. Mike, do you have something else? Also, it's the only account that focuses on two. All right, Deborah and Barak. By the way, I pronounce his name Barak, not that other one that Barak. Yeah, Barak. So anyway, the only one that focuses on two, and the story is also related twice, once in narrative form and the second time in a poetic form. So this account stands out. Let's be ready to dig into Deborah and Barak next week.